Very, very good morning to all of you and welcome to today's class. It's a Monday morning and we are starting with the chapter TDS, TCS and Advanced Tax. I am Ridhima Bhatia and I'll be taking you through the quick provisions and revisions of tax deduction at source, tax collection at source and advanced tax. So please settle in and then we can start today's topic. This is your chapter number 7. And let me tell you, this chapter is extremely important. A question is guaranteed definitely from this all the time. And also, when we talk about from the practical application, no one can escape these three mechanisms, that is TDS, TCS, and advanced tax. We'll be revising them in two classes, the class which is today and the class which is upcoming on Friday. First, we'll pick up the TDS provisions and then we'll go to the advanced tax and TCS provisions. I hope this is, you all know that this is a quick revision classes whereby we'll be discussing the provisions and then we'll be giving you time to discuss your queries. So I hope all your detailed class view has been done, which is there in your portals. Okay, so shall we begin? One second. It's done. And let's start. Good morning, Malappa. So what we'll do is I'll be giving you first a quick brief of what TDS is, which I know most of you might be knowing what it is. Once that view is completed, that what is TDS, we'll be starting with the section by section marathon, that is from one section to another section. And in between those sections, so I'll do one section, then I'll give you time to take out your question from that particular section and I'll take that query. If your query is unanswered, as I say always, please let me know when we'll be discussing it towards the end of the class. Okay, so this is how we can proceed. Good morning, Abdan. Okay, so now the concept of TDS is extremely simple, and why it is there, I'll give you a quick brief in 5 minutes. Uh, any income by the assessee from the point of view of assessee, when is earned during the year, that is called the previous year, has to be assessed in the assessment year. So whatever is earned during the previous year, say 23-24, would be assessed in the assessment year 24-25. By assessment means that he will compute the final tax liabilities and the final tax amount or the final income amount in the assessment year only. That is once the year of earning the income has ended, right? Now the assessee, there are two main problems coming in. That first is government has to wait for a longer period of time to get the revenue. What revenue? The tax revenue. Finally, when the assessment year comes, right? And then he will assess it and then he will pay it to the government. Secondly, how we can make sure that the assessee, the information which he is giving is true, honest, and authentic. So in all those cases, the government came up with the solution that let's try to have a mechanism where we can get some portion of tax in the previous year itself. I'm saying the part some portion, it can be all the portion also. So we can get the some portion of tax in the previous itself. So for that, income tax department or the government came up with three types of solution. One is TDS, another is TCS, and third is your advanced tax. Now, advance tax, as the name suggests, is a tax which you pay in advance. So generally, what is your liability is to when is to finish it off in the assessment year. But when you pay the tax in the previous itself, it's called advance tax. So this is to be done by the assessee. This is to be done by the assessee on the basis of estimation during the year. And as the year approaches or as the end of the year approaches, the estimation becomes more correct and more finalized. Now, again, this solves one problem is getting the tax timely, but how does it solve? Another problem is that what information the SSC is showing is authentic, correct, true, and fair and complete. So that from that perspective, the government came up with an idea of source. Let's put a liability on source. What do you mean by a liability on source? See, every income has its source. Like salary income has a source being employer. Rental income has a source being tenant. Interest income has a source can be bank. So every income has a source. So let's put a check on source that he or she will deduct a certain part and give it to us on behalf of the SSC. So instead of paying it to the SSC, they will pay a certain amount to us. So this simple mechanism is called tax deduction at source. Tax collection at source is also somewhat from the same branch, but the mechanism changes is when the SSC pays extra amount to the person who's collecting the amount already or collecting the payment already, and then that extra amount is given to the government. Ma'am, can you be more detailed? So now when my focus is going on TDS, so I'll be focusing now on TDS. Let's take an example. X has to make a payment to Y. Who is earning? Y is earning. Y is an SSC, obviously here. Let's take it from that perspective. Now, X will make a certain payment, say Y has given professional services to X. X has to make a payment of 1 lakh. So simple, when you don't know any TDS mechanism, you will say X will make a payment of 1 lakh to Y, and X will claim professional expenses of 1 lakh, and Y will show income of 1 lakh, right? This is what you all understand in general scenario. But with the concept when TDS comes, when the concept of TDS comes, we have to understand it like X if he has a liability, if he's a eligible deductor. Now, X is a payer here and Y is the payee. So, if this particular type of payment attracts TDS, attracts the mechanism of tax deduction at source, then the payer has to deduct the tax at a certain amount, at a certain percentage. And that percentage, let's say in this example, is 10%. So, X has to say pay 1 lakh, but after 10%, that is 10,000. That is now 90,000 he has to pay to Y. He has to pay to Y. So in the books of X, if I have to make an entry, I'll say professional expenses or professional services account debit because it's an expense, 1 lakh to X account and to TDS payable account. That is 90,000 and 10,000. You will say, why, ma'am? So I have to, the services which I have obtained is for 1 lakh, but the payment which I have to make is 90,000 to X and 10,000 as a tax deducted at source on behalf of X. Why this is my liability? Because instead of paying it to X, I'm keeping it with myself and now I have to pay to the government. So till the time I pay to the government, this is my liability. Whenever we are doing TDS, we have to assume for us from the perspective of the payer, and this person who is a payer is also called AKA deductor because it is his responsibility to deduct tax. It is his responsibility to deduct tax. So this is how the mechanism of TDS works. Now, when he will be making this payment to the government, he will make it TDS payable account debit to bank, and then he'll make tax deposited at source on behalf of so and so person. So 10,000. Yeah. Simple. So X is now the deductor. He has deducted a tax portion on the behalf of Y and he has given it to the government. Now, how will government know that this tax belongs to Y? He will tell this tax belongs to Y by saying this is of Y. No, he will tell through the PAN of Y that this person for whom this particular amount has been deducted is of Y. And now, when the government will get that information, they will show it in the 26 AS or in the account of Y that yes, we have received 10,000 as tax on your behalf. Now, all these particular things from the point of view of deduction to the point of view of showing it into the deductees account, Deductee means now my friend pay would be the deductee. So who will deduct the tax is the deductor, X would be the deductor, and Y would be the deductee. So all of this from the point of view of deduction to the point of view of deductee, from the point where the deduction happens to the point where it actually reaches to the deductee accounts requires various stages of compliance. What are the stages of compliance? All the stages of compliance are basically from the perspective of who? The deductor. Compliance means all these things which he has to do. What all things does he has to do? First, he has to obviously correctly deduct the tax. Correct. Then he has to, after deduction, he has to deposit the tax. Then after deposit, he has to tell the government that what tax I deposited belongs to so and so person. This is called through filing of TDS returns. And then he has to give a certificate also to the payee so that he is satisfied that yes, my tax is deposited and is with the government and is in the safe hand. So he has to issue the TDS certificate also. So you see that from the standpoint view of deductor, there are so many tasks: deducting the tax, depositing the tax, filing the returns, and issuing the certificate. So all of these tasks he does in a common unique identification number called TAN, tax deduction and collection of account number. So, Yani, to doing all the TDS compliances and also TCS in this case, the deductor has to obtain a unique identification number, TAN, where he can park all his tax deduction compliances, where he can park and do all his tax deduction compliances. Yes, that being said, in certain sections, this particular TAN is not required, but otherwise, the deductor has to mandatory obtain the TAN once he knows that he has to deduct the taxes. One TAN is enough for all types of deduction because TDS is a mechanism which is attracted on different types of payments. If those particular types of payments are not there in the sections, you don't have to deduct tax. You don't have to deduct tax. But for all types of payments, there is one TAN because from all deduction responsibility, he has to obtain one TAN. And same TAN is there for TDS, TCS. Okay. And he has to do all the compliances in that particular TAN. But yes, he has to obtain deductees PAN so that he can park all the particular requirements, or sorry, park all the particular taxes and tell the government that yes, this particular tax belongs to this particular person. This is how the TDS mechanism works. But from Y's point of view, if I have to talk students, what would be the income? Will it be 1 lakh? Will it be 90,000 or will it be 10,000? What is the income? The income remains 1 lakh. The income remains to be 1 lakh. It is not 90. Why? It is because the income which was generated was one only. The only difference got was cash inflow variation. Instead of receiving all the amount to me, I am receiving as why I am receiving 90,000 in my bank account and 10,000 is with government for my own income taxes, which happens in future. Right? So it's my sort of a current asset, TDS receivable. So when in the assessment year, when I will be making final payment of taxes, I will be adjusting this 10,000 with my final tax liability. If the tax liability is more, then I will pay extra amount. If the tax liability is less, then I will get the refund. So this is how the tax deduction at source mechanism works for everyone. Any doubt? Why I spent 10 minutes here? Because I wanted to have everyone on the same page, that clarity that how TDS works. Yes, Yake, 10,000, which is the tax credit which he has received, will be used to pay the taxes for that particular assessment year. Any doubt in the TDS mechanism? Few more things that you have to remember is that TDS is a particular type is attracted on particular types of payment only. If it is not there, you will not deduct the tax. So obviously, the first step which you have to remember is what is the first thing which you have to see is what is the type of payment. Whether it's salary, whether it's rent, whether it's interest, whether it's professional services, what is the type of payment? Second thing which you have to see is whether in which section that particular payment is covered, obviously. Then whether I am an eligible deductor or not. Why I'm saying I am an eligible deductor or not? Because now for doing all the compliances of or for understanding the TDS mechanism, you have to understand yourself as the deductor. You have to understand your point of view from a deductor point of view, not from the person who is earning an income, but from the point of view of the person who is source of the income, who has to deduct taxes. So whether you are an eligible deductor or not. It can happen that I'm making a particular type of payment, but I am not an eligible deductor as per that particular section. So I'm out of the scope. Second thing is whether the person to whom I have to deduct the tax is an eligible deductee or not. Then obviously, what is the rate that particular sections tell at which rate I have to deduct the tax? Now, this rate in general is flat rate. That is, you irrespective of whatever the amount is in lakhs and crores, you will not increase it by cess or surcharge. If it is written 10%, you have to deduct tax at 10%. If it is written 20%, you have to deduct tax at 20%, provided the deductee or the payee is not a non-resident. If that person is a non-resident, then you will increase that amount by cess and surcharge. Then you will increase that amount by cess and surcharge. So the rate is also clear. Now, another important thing is time of deduction. Now, what do you mean by time of deduction, as in day or night? No, time of deduction means when do you have to deduct the tax. So whenever a payment or an expense is being incurred, there are two stages. One, when it is incurred and is due. Second, when the payment is done, right? Sometimes the payment can happen earlier, sometimes the incurrence can happen earlier. So the time of deduction in most of the section would be clear when do you have to deduct the tax, whether you have to deduct the tax at the time of payment or whether you have to deduct the tax at the time of payment or deduction, whichever, or incurrence of that expense, that is debit of that expense, whichever is earlier. But that would be written in the particular section. And why it is important, time of deduction? Because if you will not deduct it at the correct time, you would be again assessing default and interest repercussions would be there. Everything has to be done from the financial year perspective. You're not deducting any tax in the assessment year. When the income is being generated, that is when the source of the income happens to either generate or pay the income. That time he has to deduct the tax. Next thing which you have to remember is the threshold limit. Sometimes all payment does not attract tax, even if all these things are tick. You are an eligible deductor, you're making the type of correct payment, but still the tax deduction at source mechanism may not work because the amount which is being paid is very less or is not hitting the threshold limit. So you might not have to deduct tax at a payment of 1,000 rupees because even if all the things are clear, but your threshold limit is not crossing. So when the threshold limit cross, then only you have to deduct the tax. Time, threshold limit, rate, reduction, and any other points. So this is what we are be trying or what we'll be trying to cover for all particular sections are these things. What is the payment section, eligible deductor, deductee, rate, time of deduction, threshold limits, and other points. If you want, you can prepare a chart side by side or you can refer to the recapitulate part. But honestly, I would request everyone to prepare that chart side by side so that you can have your own handy notes ready. Okay. So now first we proceed. Abdan, I hope your question is answered. Is to understand the first very important section, TDS, which is on the payment which is made for salary. Salary TDS payments when is in the nature of salary, I have to deduct the tax. Think yourself as an employer, think yourself as a deductor who is making that particular type of payment, and you will be bang on correct on it. So salary types of deduction. Okay, before one thing, just 1 second, sorry. All these types of nature of payments are covered from section 192 to section 195. And there are not just 3, 4 sections, there are a lot of sections in between 20, 25 sections, 194A, B, C, and so on. We will be discussing whatever is there at your particular level. Beyond that, there are still a lot of sections which would be covered under final level. But at inter level, which all sections are there in your syllabi, we'll be covering up that. Okay. So now coming to section 192. Section 192 discuss about TDS on payment of salary. So when you're making the payment which is in the nature of salary, how much tax you have to deduct, when you have to deduct. So the first question is pretty much clear, that who would be the payer here? Always the employer. Who would be the pay? The employee. So one thing is pretty much clear again, that if the payment is not taxable as salary in the hands of the employee or the recipient, then it would not be taxed under section 192, or the tax would not be deducted under section 192. I'm meaning, so salary mein what is important is the payer and the pay should have master servant relationship, correct? When you tax it in the hands of employee. Now, so if I'm paying salary to a partner, I will not cover up it here, because the partner's salary is not taxed as salary in the hands of partner. It is taxed as income in the hands of PGB, in the head PGBP. So just because the term salary is included does not mean it becomes salary as per the head salary income and also as per section 192. So you will deduct tax under section 192 only when the payment is taxed as salary in the recipient's hand. Number one, number two, all those points clear. Next thing is, ma'am, how much tax has to be deducted and when? When the tax has to be deducted at the time of payment. That is when you're making the payment of salary. The salary gets due in the entire month. It is receivable on a particular date. But when the actual payment is made, then the tax has to be deducted. Suppose the salary gets due on the 31st of the month, but it is only paid on the 7th of the next month. So the tax has to be deducted on the 7th of the next month. So the time of deduction would be the payment date. So when the payment happens, then you have to deduct the tax. Next thing which you have to remember is the rate. Rate here is no specific rate. It is average slab rate of employee. So how this particular section is different from all TDS section is, here for an employer, see, as an employer, you know everything of salary. You know how much tax has to be deducted, how much salary would be given, and basis the declaration which is given by employee, you know how much would be exempt, how much would be taxable, what is the value of perquisite, everything. So the employer has to make a mini computation of the entire salary which he's been paying to the person during the year. एक computation बनाएंगे for that particular employee. Basis that computation, they will compute the tax, and basis that tax, they will deduct that particular amount every month based on average basis. Now, so at the beginning of the year, I'm making a computation, and every month when the payment is happening, I have to make a computation and see if there is any variation, and I will compute the tax liability, and I will spread that tax liability into the remaining months of tax deduction, into the remaining months of the payment. Simple. Now, the question is, ma'am, do the employer has to make it for all the employee? Yes, he has to make this computation for all the employees. Even if there are 1,000 employees, the computation, the software actually makes all those things. The software makes the entire computation. You just have to put in the figure. What is the basic salary of the employee? What is the HRA? What is the rent he's paying? All those things you have to just put it into the software. It gives you the computation. It gives you the tax which is deducted. Ma'am, do I have to deduct the tax for all salary payments? No. When the salary is exceeding the basic exemption limit, then only you have to deduct the tax for the all salary payments. Next question is, how will you will say, ma'am, how will employer get to know that employee kitna rent pay kar raha hai, how much rent the employee is paying, how much deduction he is having? So there is a declaration which you take at the beginning of the year or at the time of joining of the year. Based on that declaration, you, as an employer, you have to mandatorily consider whatever the employee has given you. Whatever the employee has given you means whatever the declaration for exemptions under Section 10 he has given, like what is my HRA, what is my office duty allowances, estimated kharcha and everything. Then all the reductions from ATC to ATU you have to consider, because you're making a computation for every employee. So he will give you a declaration that I will put ATC mein itna money, ATD mein itna money, I will do this particular thing. And whatever he has given to you on declaration basis, you have to consider it. Next, if he's telling you about any other income, that also you have to consider. Any other income means, suppose he tells you that apart from my salary, I have house property income. If he has given you that information, you have to consider, I have other sources income. If he has given that information, you have to consider. Next is losses. Do I have to consider all losses as an employer? The answer is no. I will only consider house property loss. That is interest certificate loonie, and then I will consider house property loss. So all of this has to be documented at the beginning of the year basis on declaration, and towards the end of the year it has to be documented with the proofs. If the employee fails to give you the proof, you will ignore that part. So suppose he tells me at the beginning of the year, he told me at the beginning of the year that he would be making 1,50,000 ka investment under ATC. By the end of the year, he has not made that investment. So I will not consider by the end of the year in the last month ka computation that ATC. So generally, if you'll go into the practical world, you will see towards the end of the year, the employee or the employer starts asking for the proofs. December onwards rather, then give us the proof so that we can consider what you have said is correct or not. If not, they will reverse it or they will not consider it. For losses of house property also, I will consider what is the interest certificate. For incomes, I don't have to get any proof. Another thing which must be coming in your mind is, ma'am, you have told that tax has to be deducted on an average slab rate. But which scheme do I have to follow? 115 BAC or old scheme? So the employee will tell you at the beginning of the year in which scheme he wants to follow. If he wants to opt out from 115 BAC or if he does not want to opt out from 115 BAC. This would be again told at the beginning of the year or at the time of joining. If he does not tell you which scheme he wants to follow, तो कौन सा करोगे? The default one, which is 115 BAC. Now, suppose in 1 month you followed 115 BAC. Now he comes to you and say, I don't want to follow 115 BAC. I want to follow old scheme. Then what will you do? No, you will not change. So once the scheme is opted, you have to follow it for the entire year for the tax reduction purpose. Yes, the employee has a choice to change the scheme in his return filing, but for the TDS perspective, once you've chosen the scheme for tax reduction, it will be done for the entire year. You cannot switch on and off and on and off in the year. For all these things, you have to get the proof. I think all that points are clear. Last point which comes here is the concept of dual employment or part-time employment. Dual employment or part-time employment means, so if I'm working with two employers at the same time, or if I'm working after one or another job, what do I have to do? See, it is recommended that you give your information of the previous job during the year to the new employer so that he can consider it and in your tax computation. Why I'm saying? Because otherwise, he would be unknown of the fact, and both the employers would have given you the benefit of standard deduction. Both the employers have given you the benefits of your this particular thing called slab rate. So it's better. It is recommended that you tell your other employment details also so that it can be considered. Again, not mandatory to disclose, but just to tell you when you change jobs or when you have two employments at a time, it's better to tell them. Okay? Now you will say, ma'am, do I have to always tell the income information to my employer? Not necessary. The salary ka all information is with him. You cannot escape it out. Other income ka information is up to you whether you have to tell or not. we have covered all the examples of dual employment and how to calculate tax in the detailed lecture. So just go through that once, okay? Meanwhile, if there's any doubt from section 192, please let me know. All the points covered here are covered. Yes, Seetfala, you are right. So this was section 192, very quick and very fastly covered, and almost all points are covered. Any doubt under section 192? These are on your list available options of the not available options, actually, the documentation which the employer has to make sure is in place for giving you the benefits while computing the taxes. Okay, shall we proceed? Any doubts on in TDS on salary? Next section is interest on securities. I've seen very less question coming from it, but still we'll cover up it very quickly. Interest on securities. Now, interest, if you know, again, can come from various sources. I can get interest from bonds, debentures, preference shares. Then I can get interest from my NABARD bonds, 54 EC bonds. I can get interest from PPF. I can get interest from bank accounts. So there are various, or I can get interest on general loan also, right? So there are various sources from where I can get interest. So the interest section is divided into two particular parts. One is section 193, which is interest on securities. And another is section 194A, which is interest other than interest on securities. Interest on securities, section 193, is not very common in the daily life, if I say. Why? Because generally these securities are through companies or bonds, which are through government, where we as a deductor do not deduct tax much. We as a deductor deduct taxes on other interest payments. We as a deductor deduct tax on the other interest payments. So I'll quickly cover up what all are covered here or not. So here again, TDS has to be deducted by any person who is paying interest on security. Any person who is paying interest on security, and it can be from any security, any government or state securities, etc. The TDS has to be deducted at the rate of 10% when he is making the payment to a resident person. So who is the eligible deductee? Resident person. Tax is deducted at the time of credit or payment, whichever is. At the time of credit or payment, whichever is earlier. Apart from that, you have to remember that even if this is interest on securities, there are certain things which you have to be very sure of. That there is no, even if there is interest, even if the payment is in the nature of interest and you are making payment in the nature of interest, you will not deduct the tax, even if it's a security, the interest when the TDS is payable, or when the interest is payable on national development bonds, saving certificates, 54 EC bonds, any security of central or state government pay, there is no TDS. मतलब government securities पे there is no TDS. But remember, This is important. These two securities, which you see, that is 8% saving taxable bonds of 2003 issue and 7.75% saving taxable bonds of 2018 issue. These bonds पे जो interest है यानी 8% and 7.5% जो interest मिलता है उस पे 10% TDS would be deducted provided the interest payable is more than 10,000 during the year. If the interest payable is more than 10,000 during the year, then only the TDS would be deducted. Secondly, debentures paid. So if a public company is paying interest to an individual or HUF on debentures, interest on debentures, and that is if it's being paid through account pay check and does not exceed 5,000, then no TDS has to be deducted. Then no TDS has to be deducted. And thirdly, any securities of LIC interest which is paid on any securities to LIC, GIC, subsidiaries of GIC, us pe bhi no TDS is deducted. So when the pay is LIC, GIC, etc., then no TDS is required to be deducted. Now, what do we have to ultimately remember in this particular section? Is there any threshold limit? In general, there is no threshold limit. If there is any interest on security, the tax has to be deducted at 10% by any person making a payment to a resident person at the time of credit or payment, whichever is earlier. But what do we have to remember is what particular is the exceptions here. Exceptions are NABARD securities, DMAT securities, 54 EC bonds, government securities. But government securities पे interest आ जाएगा if, TDS आ जाएगा if they are 8% saving taxable bonds and 7.7% saving taxable bonds of 2018 issue, and that too when the interest exceeds 10,000 during the financial year. उसके अलावा when public companies paying interest to an individual HUF on debentures, they will not deduct tax up to a limit of interest of 5,000, and if that is being paid to account pay check, and any payment of interest you're making to any insurance company, LIC, GIC, no TDS has to be deducted. Next is interest other than interest on securities. Any doubt in section 193? Again, I told you this is not very common section which I've seen in exam, but just a quick read to it. The employee will tell to the employer in which scheme I want to deduct the tax. If he fails to tell, then the employer will deduct under the default scheme. I know we are speeding up. अगर कहीं पे भी किसी को कोई doubt है, please let me know because we have a lot of sections to cover up. So, ma'am, if the debentures पे interest public company किसी और को दे रही, there is no TDS threshold limit. No. If suppose a public company is paying interest on debenture to another company, then they will deduct tax at the rate of 10%. Okay, so now we're proceeding ahead to next section, which is 194A. 7.5 Yaqib and 8% वाले पे there will be no TDS up to a amount of 10,000, but the moment it exceeds 10,000, tax will be deducted. Correct. But otherwise, all quick government bonds or government securities pay tax is not required to be deducted. Okay. Now we proceed towards our next section. Seat color, there is no threshold limit in general. There is no threshold limit, but when there is debentures and your debentures, public company and individual HUF, it is 5,000. And when they are saving bonds, 7.75% or 8%, it is 10,000. Now, the next section is extremely important, extremely common, and extremely, what do you say, it's the one which comes in use in daily life also or in exams also. Interest other than interest on securities. Other than interest on securities, there can be so many interests. FD interest, saving bank interest. I have taken loan from you and I'm paying you interest. Any type of interest. You have taken loan from bank, you are paying interest. Bank is paying you interest. Uh, Interest on income taxes fund, wherever the term interest is coming, other than on securities, everything is under the scope of 194A. Yes, that being said, certain type of interest would be excluded, but everything which you can think from the perspective of interest is here. So now this makes this section very widely popular and very widely common also. But what all you have to consider here is that again, your same question, ma'am, who would be the deductor, who would be the deductee? So same 194A may the deductor can be any person, that is the payer or the deductor. Why I'm using this word? Can be any person except individual and HF. So you were saying कि मैम यानी individual and HF को TDS नहीं काटना? No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying individual and HF को TDS तभी काटना है. Individual and HF would deduct TDS only when in the preceding financial year. In the preceding financial year, the turnover in case of business is more than 1 crore or gross receipts in case of profession is more than 50 lakhs. Now you will say, ma'am, what do you mean by this? So suppose I have to deduct the TDS in the financial year 23-24. So I will see whether I am an eligible deductor for interest payments or not. I will see the turnover of preceding financial year, which is financial year 22-23. If in financial year 22-23, my turnover exceeds 1 crore, then only, correct, Yakir, then only I will deduct the tax in this particular year for interest payments. Otherwise, even if I have turnover in this year of more than 1 crore, but in the preceding year I don't have it of more than 1 crore, I will not deduct the tax. Also, second question can come in your mind is, ma'am, last year it was more than 1 crore, but this year it is less than 1 crore. Will I deduct the tax? Yes. You will not deduct the tax for the next financial year because for the next financial year, the preceding year turnover would not be more than 1 crore. But otherwise, you will have to deduct the tax in the current financial year if the preceding year turnover is more than 1 crore or gross receipts is more than 50 lakhs when I talk about from profession. Ma'am, why this exclusion is given? So you will see students, this I'll not explain this concept again, but this concept is covered in the 194A, 194C, 194J, 194I. All the payments which are extremely common in any business, everywhere they have given that individual and HUF will deduct TDS only when they have so and so turnover. That is, they are not small turnover people, they have a good turnover that is of more than 1 crore or gross receipts of more than 50 lakhs, then only they will deduct the tax. So you will say, ma'am, why so it is done? Because remember at the beginning of the class, I told you that how many compliances a person who is a deductor has to do. He has to timely deduct the tax, timely deposit it, file the returns of TDS, give the certificate, and this all has to be done again with the help of an accountant, which is an unnecessary expense for the TDS perspective if you're a small taxpayer. So that's why they've excluded the individual HF who are small taxpayers or small taxpayers from the liability to deduct tax, because they understand that unnecessarily they have to again cope up with other compliances, which is not correct. That's why they've excluded them on the common payments. Employee की बात हो रही थी section 192 में, they have to do it. Section 193 maybe there was no such exclusion. You will see this exclusion of small individual and HF as deducted only in the common sections 194A, 194C, 194J, 194H, 194I, all of these common sections. Okay. So this concept is clear and this will apply in the upcoming sections also. Next thing you will ask from me is, ma'am, what is the threshold limit here? Once. So as such, if you'll ask, I'll say that the threshold limit is up to 5,000. That is when you make a payment of more than 5,000 of interest, you have to deduct the tax. In general, the threshold limit is 5,000. But when the payer, that is the person who has to deduct tax, is bank, cooperative bank, or post office, then the limit is 40K. That is when they are making the interest of more than 40K, then only they will deduct the tax. And if the payee, that is to whom the interest is being paid, is a senior citizen, then the limit is 50K. So generally, if I am making you an interest payment, I have to deduct tax if it is more than if the interest is more than 5,000, the tax would be triggered, the TDS would be triggered. But when the bank is paying the interest, when the bank is paying interest, the TDS has to be deducted when it is more than 40,000 in general or 50,000 and the pay is senior citizen. Now, this 50,000 limit, yes, is in concurrence with your ATTTB, but just to give you a heads up, when bank is paying interest, then they will deduct the tax when it is more than 50,000. Remember that this limit is per bank, and all these limits are per person, per pay, per financial year. Okay, I can be making interest payment to multiple people, but that I have to see the threshold limit per pay, whether I'm making it more than 40,000 or more than 50,000 or more than 5,000 as the case may be. If it is not, then I will not deduct. If I'm suppose making 10,000 ka payment to 10 people, that does not make me a person who has to deduct the tax. The limits have to be seen per financial year, per financial year, per pay. Also, this limit of 40 and 50K is per bank. That is not per branch, but per bank. That means suppose if I'm receiving interest from ICICI Bank, Delhi branch, ICICI Bank, Mumbai branch, ICICI Bank, Kolkata branch. So they will see whether I'm hitting the limit in total for all branches and not just one branch, not just one branch. Time of deduction is credit or payment, whichever is earlier. Credit or payment, whichever is earlier. Last point are the exceptions. Exceptions means that even if it is an interest, but it would not be covered under the provision of section 194A and no TDS has to be deducted. First of all is saving bank interest. So the limit of 40,000 or 50,000, saving bank interest is excluded. That is, on saving bank interest, the bank does not have to deduct the tax. So what kind of interest again? Every interest, recurring deposit interest, on that they have to deduct the tax. So saving bank interest पे there is no TDS. Income tax refund पे interest आता है ना, उस पे भी there is no TDS. Partnership interest. Partner giving interest to the partnership firm on drawings or partnership firm paying interest to the partner or interest on capital, any such thing would not get, it is interest, I'm not denying, but it is out of the scope of section 194A. Common one next is interest when paid to bank, cooperative bank, financial corporations, LIC, UTIs. So if I'm making interest payment to them, even if I'm an eligible deductor, I will not deduct the tax when I'm paying interest to bank. So this is the reason when you're taking loan from bank and it has an interest component of the in the EMI, you're not deducting the tax. Why? Because it is out of the scope of section 194A. Similarly, LIC, if I'm paying interest, I will not deduct the tax. Similarly, financial institutions, UTIs, so if I'm making payment of interest, I will not deduct the tax. Now the question is, ma'am, NBFCs are not covered? Yes, NBFCs, so when I'm making the payment, then the tax has to be deducted. NBFC is not covered in exceptions. And last point which you have to remember here is, apart from this, is that ये cooperative society वाला point है. इसके अलावा all the things are covered here. या कोऑपरेटिव सोसाइटी अपने मेंबर्स को कुछ इंटरेस्ट पे कर रहा हो तब भी नो टैक्सेस रिक्वायर्ड टू बी डिडक्टेड बट यस इसमें देयर वाज वन थिंग व्हिच हैज कम recently is when a cooperative society making payments to another cooperative societies or members, then no TDS is required to be deducted on the interest payments. But when a cooperative bank is making, इसका exception था that if the turnover, यहाँ पे आता नहीं है वैसे कॉमनली बट ये कहाँ लिखूंगी मैं दिखा दूँ आपको so that you can relate. Anyway, it is not there, but just to tell you, if the turnover of the payer cooperative society is more than 50 crore and the interest payable is more than 40,000 per annum, then the tax has to be deducted. Otherwise, no tax is required to be deducted. ठीक है? ये बहुत कम आता है, but just to give you an extra information, this is particularly written. Just quickly give a look to section 194A and 193 also. If there is any confusion, please let me know. Meanwhile, if all is clear, just go look to an illustration too. And अगर वो clear है तो please ये भी बता दो कि clear है. Upcoming section is extremely important section, students. So please focus. No, Prashant. It is very much applicable. Section 194A is very much applicable on individual HUF. Individual and HUF as an eligible deductor, they would become only an eligible deductor when they in the preceding financial year have a turnover of more than 1 crore in case of business or gross receipts of more than 50 lakhs in case of profession. If I don't have any business, I'm a salaried individual, I'm paying whatever interest to whosoever, I don't have to deduct tax under 194A. And also, students, please be very careful. If a question asks you, don't be over smart. If a question asks whether the tax has to be deducted under section 194A or not, just tell whether it is to be deducted under section 194A or not. That's it. Don't go and finding an answer in which particular section the tax has to be deducted. Why I'm saying so? Because if it is not asked, don't write because you can be wrong. So why deduct your answer in it? If just ask whether 194A में tax कटेगा या नहीं, just tell that. Don't tell कि कौन से section में और कोई section में जाके कटेगा. Don't do that, okay? And TDS के sections भी याद रखने. Correct seat color. If hmm. Okay, sorted. Shall we proceed to next very important section now? One second. Preeti, NBFCs are non-banking finance company. They are giving you finances, but they are not banks. They are not banks. For example, you must have heard about Indiabulls Housing Finance, HDB Financial Services, Bajaj Finance. All of these things are NBFCs, are your NBFCs. They are giving you finance, but as in they are financing for you, but they're not banks. They do not have a license for by the same for bank as approved by RBI. I hope all of you are preparing the chart as discussed. Okay, so now the question comes payment, next type of payment, which is extremely very important. You can write it here also. Payment to contractors and subcontractors. This particular section is covered under section 194C. This particular type of payment is covered under section 194C. Why it is extremely important? Because contractual payment is something which you are making in, day out. Contractual payment not necessarily means that it is a contract which is written and signed and then you're making. No, contractual payment may basically it can be any contract of work or any contract of labor, any service which is being provided to you of work or a labor contract. How it is different from professional services? See, whenever someone is giving you professional services, they must have any degree of specifications, skills, etc. But when I talk about work contract, it means a general contract of work or a labor. Someone giving you a service of annual maintenances of lift, it's a work contract. AC maintenance, AC services, work contract. Whitewashing, work contract. Repairs, work contract. So any sort of typing services, work contract. Any work basically or any contract of labor is your work contract and it will attract definitely the provisions of section 194C. And trust me, this is one such type of particular payment which is extremely common from all small to big businesses. Now, the question comes here is again the same. And who would be the deductor deductee? First of all, this section payment to contract. Suppose X has to make payment to Y for work contract. So you will say कि मैम X हमने समझा था X is a deductor and payer and Y is the deductee or payee. Correct. Now suppose X is making the payment to Y for the contractual work. Who is the contractor and contractee? Just because वो same sound कर रहा है deductor payer contractor मत कर देना. Y is the contractor. Y is the contractor who has given you contractual services and you are the contractee. So तभी यहाँ पे लिखा हुआ है payment to contractors, not payment by contractors. ठीक है, ये छोटी सी बहुत छोटा सा चीज है. Just remember that who is providing you the services of contract is the contractor and who is getting the services is the contractee, aka deductor and payer in this particular scenario. Now the question is now all the same, ma'am. Who is the payer? Who is the payee? So let's discuss that. So the payer can be any person. Payer can be any person, or I should say, deductor can be any person except individual and HUF. Same like 194A. Individual and HUF will not deduct tax under section 194C until and unless. So, individual and HUF will only deduct tax when in the preceding year. Preceding year, their turnover exceeds 1 crore or gross receipts in case of profession exceeds 50 lakhs. Again, the same logic because TDS में बहुत compliances है and we will only cover those individual and HUF, those who have a good turnover, at least a good turnover in the preceding financial year. If they don't have that turnover, they are not eligible deductors. So irrespective of whatever contractual payments I'm making, but if I'm not a eligible deductor, I will not deduct the tax. So if I'm not an individual in HUF who has a turnover of more than 1 crore in the preceding financial year or gross receipts of more than 50 lakhs, I will not deduct the tax. Payee can be any resident person. Payee can be any resident person. Isn't better? Pay can be any resident person. Next is the time limit. Again, it is credit or payment, whichever is earlier. Credit or payment, whichever is earlier. If you're making advance payment, you will deduct the tax on advance payment. If the bill has received first, you will deduct the tax at the time of bill. Interestingly, what is the rate, ma'am, and threshold limit? ये जो दो चीजें हैं, इसमें बहुत 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 interesting है. First is the rate. Rate depends upon the payee. If the payee is individual HUF, TDS has to be deducted at the rate of 1%, 1% only. If the payee is other than individual HUF, the tax has to be deducted at the rate of 2%. Very simple. So now how will we know that the pay is an individual or HF? You will get his PAN. You will see the fourth letter of his PAN. It will tell you if it's an individual, it's an HF or it's an other than individual HF. And you will deduct the tax at 1% or 2%. The rate has been kept so minimum because in the time of contract, people who provide you contractual services can be people generating very less income. And that's why the government did not want to disrupt cash at flow. That's why they kept the rate of only 1% or 2%. Now, the threshold limit, friends, is extremely interesting. What is the threshold limit? See, threshold limit you have to see per transaction and in aggregate. What did I tell you? When you are doing TDS in general, all these limits are per financial year, per pay. I did not say per transaction, per pay, per financial year. If I talk about interest also, interest during the year, if exceeds 40,000 or 50,000 or 5,000 as the case may be, then you have to deduct the tax. Okay, it can be 40,000 in one go, it can be 40, thoda karke 40,000, whatever the way it is, then you have to deduct the tax. Similarly, when I talk about 194C, The limit is that is 30,000 in single bill. If it is more than 30,000 in single bill, the tax has to be deducted under 194C, or if it is more than 1 lakh in aggregate. 1 lakh in aggregate यानी credit entry 1 lakh से ज़्यादा हो गई है, then I have to deduct the tax. दोनों चीजें I have to see. It can happen that the bill can be less than 30,000, but the total credits during the year in that particular ledger has exceeded 1 lakh, then the tax has to be deducted. It can happen that one bill is only of more than 30,000, but the entire amount in the credit of the account is not more than 1 lakh. Then only that on that 30,000 ka bill I have to deduct the tax. Just like given in this illustration. If you see illustration number 3. So the first payment which is made by ABC Limited to Mr. X, a contractor, will it attract? So first thing you have to see is what is the type of payment in the question. So this will tell you 194C. Second thing you have to see whether the person is an eligible deductor. Yes. Then you have to see whether the person is the eligible deductor. You will say yes. अब यहाँ पे ये नहीं लिखा हुआ whether Mr. X is a resident or not. You will assume that that person is a resident. Then you have to see what is the rate and threshold limit. Before seeing, you have to see whether the threshold limit has hit or not. Threshold limit is 30,000 in a single bill or 1 lakh in total. Whichever happens, happens. Now, since the payee is an individual, you know that you have to deduct the tax at a rate of 1%. This is also clear. Now let's see. When the first bill came on 1st May 2023, will I deduct the tax as ABC Limited? The answer is no. Why? Because the payment has not crossed 30,000 also as in a single transaction, and in aggregate also has not crossed 30,000. When the second bill comes, will I deduct the tax? As answer is no, because we 20 plus 25, 45 है. The TDS would not be required to be deducted. When first December wala bill came, do I have to deduct the tax? The answer is again no. The reason is simple. अभी भी ये 7 lakh, 73,000 हुए, which is again less than both the threshold limits. Now when the March bill came, 73,000 plus 30,000 total हो गया आपका 1,03,000. The March bill came, now the aggregate in the account is crossing 1 lakh. So I have to deduct the TDS on the entire 1 lakh at the rate of 1%, which is 1030, and the net payment would be made, which is 30,000 minus 1030 of 28,970. Had it been again 25,000, then again also TDS is not required to be deducted. Ajata. Clear? Yes or no? Yakib, Aditya, Kala, is it clear? Very good, Pooja. Very good, very good. देखिए इंडिविजुअल का टर्नओवर मतलब इंडिविजुअल का प्रोप्राइटरी बिजनेस होगा. लास्ट ईयर उस बिजनेस ने कितना टर्नओवर किया. So once the rate is clear, once the turnover is clear, once your threshold limit is clear, everything is clear. What is left in this particular section? So what is left in this particular section is the main thing. Now, what do you mean by work? What do you mean by work? See, work can be any contract which is made for supplying of labor or has a work element into it. Any element of service is there. That is a work contract. But no sale of good would be covered. That is pretty much clear here. But ma'am, what does extra part work means? Work, again, I told you, any type of service, etc., is covered as work contract. But the income tax has specifically, the Act has specifically defined these five in or included these five in the definition of work. I'm not saying work does not mean anything apart from this. I'm just saying that work can be any contract or service or a supply of labor. But apart from that, this definitely would be work contract. And if any payment is made for these five things, the tax has to be deducted under section 194C. The tax has to be deducted under section 194C. What are those? Advertising. So if I'm making the TDS, if I'm making the payment for advertising, suppose I have to get a print ad, then I will either contact Times of India directly or I will contact any agency. To whomsoever I'm making the payment, I will deduct the tax under section 194C because the service which is being provided is advertising. Next is broadcasting and telecasting, including productions of programs for such broadcasting or telecasting. Now, this is when the channel, or if suppose I have to go to radio. Uh, what is broadcasting and telecasting before that? Broadcasting is when something is reaching to hundreds and millions of people through radios. Telecasting is when it is being reached to 100 million people through वीडियो एंड ऑडियो. ठीक है. सो ब्रॉडकास्ट जब आप जाते हो रेडियो में ऐड करने या रेडियो में कुछ बताने, that is broadcasting. When you go and tell it through radio, that is that, or through TV source or through YouTube, etc., that is telecasting. So if the payment is made to broadcast something or telecast something, then section 194C is attractive. Carriage of goods or passengers by any mode of transport other than by railways. Now suppose I have a work of manufacturing bags. Now I have to transfer all the bags from my Mumbai factory to Chennai. So I will either contract a good transport agency or a carriage agency, right? एक truck वाले को contract करूंगी कि they will take all my bags from my factory to another place. So I will make payment to them. That payment which is being made will attract the provisions of section 194C because it is carriage of goods. Similarly, if I have to pay it to a travel transport company for the carriage of my employees from their every day from a metro station to the factory, I'm making the payment to them. So that is carriage of passengers. So again, 194C would be attracted. Whenever you're making payment for carriage of goods or carriage of passengers, 194C would be attracted. Other than railways mode say the carriage is happening. Why railways are excluded? Because railways in general first were operated by government earlier and government का TDS काट के government को देना, इसलिए railways were excluded. Next is catering. रेस्टोरेंट में जब खाना खाने जाते हो, दैट इज नॉट केटरिंग. केटरिंग इज व्हेन यू गिव अ कॉन्ट्रैक्ट टू अ पर्टिकुलर पर्सन हु इज अ केटरर to make this food as per this menu for so and so people. That is called catering. So when I will be making payment to the caterer for that, that would be covered under section 194C. Last point is very important, which is manufacturing or supplying of a product according to the requirement or specification of a customer by using material purchased from such customer or its associate, etc., etc. अब इसका क्या मतलब है? इसके लिए the best example I always give is of a sofa. Now suppose I want to have a sofa in my office. I go to the market, I purchase a sofa, and I make a payment. Okay. Will it attract any TD section of 194C? Answer is no, because it's a purchase of good. I went to them, they had a sofa ready, I picked up it. Okay, that is purchase of good. I went to the furniture place. Okay, second example. I went to the furniture place, I picked a sofa. I liked it. Only thing I did not like was the color. I told them I'll come tomorrow, just change the color from blue to brown. They said, okay. I again picked it up and came. Is this a contract? No. Because just a small specification, otherwise everything was as per them. Now, instead of going to the sofa wala, I call a carpenter at my office. Okay. I ask him that I want this much size for sofa, this particular type of foam, this particular type of color, etc., etc. He tells me that okay, provide me so and so material, and this I go to the market, get the material, I get the wood, I get the foam, I get the kapda, everything. Now the payment which I'll be making up to the carpenter would be covered under your definition of work, which is manufacturing or supplying. Yani he was making it as per my particular requirements to the requirement or specifications provided by the customer by using material purchased from such customer or its associate. The material which he was using basically is like a purchase in the sense he'll bill me back, etc. You can read it as material provided also for your understanding. So that in that case would be a work contract. That would be a work contract. So wherever the person is using the material which I provided and the specification is mine, 194C would be covered. Why? Because it is coming under the definition of work. But apart from this, you students also have to remember few things. One, when I talk about definition of work, and I see individual or HF को TDS कब काटना है under 194C when they have in the preceding year the turnover of more than 1 crore or gross receipts in case of profession of more than 50 lakhs. Correct? They have to deduct the tax. Right? Yes or no? Yes. But 194C gives one more relaxation to individual and HF, that is personal purpose. Only 194C and 194J give that relaxation. So 194C give that relaxation that if you are making personal purpose payment, then even if all the conditions are fulfilled, threshold limit है, work की definition में आ रहा है, even if you are a person who has a turnover of more than 1 crore in the preceding financial year, all conditions which we discussed are fulfilled, but the payment is for personal purpose, TDS would not be attracted. Ma'am, example, केटरिंग बेस्ट एग्जाम्पल है. मेरे ऑफिस में कुछ इवेंट हुआ, वहां पे केटरिंग करा, आई विल डिडक्ट टैक्स अंडर सेक्शन 194C व्हेन आई एम मेकिंग पेमेंट टू द केटरर प्रोवाइडेड आई हैव दैट टर्नओवर इन द प्रीसीडिंग फाइनेंशियल ईयर. ओके, बट मेरे घर पे कोई फंक्शन है, मैंने केटरिंग का पेमेंट किया, आई विल नॉट डिडक्ट टैक्स. आई विल नॉट डिडक्ट टैक्स अंडर सेक्शन 194C. कैरेज ऑफ गुड्स और पैसेंजर्स में मेरे को गुड्स अपना ऑफिस का गुड्स मुंबई ब्रांच से दिल्ली ब्रांच पे भिजवाना था, आई विल डिडक्ट टैक्स अंडर 194C. बट सपोज मेरे को अपने घर का सामान मुंबई से आई वाज शिफ्टिंग टू दिल्ली, वहां पे भिजवाना था, आई विल नॉट डिडक्ट टैक्स अंडर 194C बिकॉज द नेचर is personal, because the nature is personal. So any personal purpose payment will be out of the scope of 194C from the individual and HUF perspective, and they don't have to deduct tax for it. Only this is under 194C and 194J. Last part which you have to remember under your contract is for the carriage of goods and passenger. The good transport agency. I'll be making payment to good transport agency or your truck person who has either carried my goods or carried my passengers, carried of people or carrying of passengers. But remember, if the good transport agency comes to you and tell that we do not, that we are a small transport agency, don't deduct tax, I will not deduct tax provided, what are the conditions? Provided they give me the PAN, good transport agency, they give me the declaration that they do not own more than 10 truck during the year. And during the year, they did not have more than 10 truck, and they give me the PAN, then I will not deduct the tax. Then I will not deduct the tax. It works purely on the cases of declaration. It has nothing to do with 194E, 44AE. उसमें होता है आपका, but that is excluded. You just have to remember, if a GTA comes to you and gives you a declaration that we do not have more than 10 trucks during the year, do not deduct our tax, you will not deduct the tax, but you have to take that declaration on record. You have to take that declaration on record with the PAN of the GTA. Got it? Seat color, yes, you can say tailor of school uniform is the right example there, yes. जैसे ये 10 truck से exceed हो गया, so he's out of that declaration, you have to deduct the tax. So this is all about 194C. It's a very important section. I hope it is clear from all aspects. Just go through it once and let me know if there's any doubt. Aditya, which point? Vijay, I'll discuss this particular thing at the end of the class. Just remind me, Vijay Sharma, okay? So Aditya, GTA part में simple है. See, carriage of goods and passengers में you have to deduct the tax, correct? And now suppose the transport agency tells me that I am a small transport agency, don't deduct my tax. Small means when they don't have 10 or more trucks during the year, or more than 10 trucks, I should say, during the year, they're a small transport agency. But how will it work? They have to give me a declaration that we are a small transport agency and I have to get their PAN on record. Basis that declaration, if I receive, I will not deduct the tax, even if it is for office purpose, even if the payment made to them is more than 30,000, but I will not deduct the. So, Geeta, for your particular question, we did an example in the live class in detail for that contract. Please go through it once. No, this is not Form 15G, Aditya. It's a declaration which is being given by the contractor. 15G is different. वहां पे तो it's basis on the income. This is that they are a small transport agency and they don't have more than 10 trucks during the year. Then you basically give this particular types of relief, but you have to give that GTA have to give the PAN. Okay, so quickly we'll take a 10-minute break from here. Please have something and we'll be back with more sections discussion. Meanwhile, if you have any doubt, please let me know. Okay, so thank you so much. Okay, thank you. So any doubt under section 194C? I hope all the points were covered. Before we move on to 194C, does anyone have any doubt? I hope everyone has been settled in. Sorted, Pakka? We have just few more sections to go and then we'll be almost covered for section our TDS sections. Let's see what maximum we can cover up today. Okay. Hmm. There's very few of them left. Don't worry. Perfect. Okay. And our next section is extremely easy. 194H, which is TDS on commission. टीडीएस ऑन कमीशन बहुत सिंपल सा सेक्शन है कुछ भी इसमें इतना ज्यादा टेंशन वाला बात ही नहीं है बस कमीशन क्या होता है कमीशन इज व्हेन समवन इज एक्टिंग एज एन एजेंट फॉर यू और फॉर योर बिहाफ एंड देन यू पे अ सर्टेन ब्रोकरेज कमीशन का अगर आप डीप डेफिनेशन इफ यू स्टडी every type of agency for securing a contract or any sale of any particular item except sale of securities. Any stockbrokers are not covered here. Is covered under section 194H. So who I will be making payment for the commission, then I have to deduct tax. But again, the same questions remain same. Who would be the eligible deductor? Any person except individual and HUF. Any person except individual and HUF. And individual and HUF कब आएंगे? When in the preceding year, same, exactly same. They have a turnover of more than 1 crore or gross receipts of more than 50 lakhs. 1 crore in case of profession, 1 crore in case of business and 50 lakhs in case of profession. If that is the case, then they have to deduct the tax under section 194H. Otherwise, they don't have to deduct the tax. Time of deduction is same, payment of credit, whichever is earlier. अभी तक payment में क्या क्या covered था? Only 192 salary. उसके अलावा अभी तक otherwise all sections are payment of credit, whichever is earlier. Very good, Pooja. Now, threshold limit यहाँ पे 15,000 है and rate 5% है. यानी when the commission is of more than 15,000, then you have to deduct the tax. Otherwise, you don't have to deduct the tax. Or when the rate and the rate is 5%. अच्छा, remember one more thing. When except for few sections, whenever the threshold limit gets triggered, you have to deduct the tax on the entire amount. So suppose 20,000 का commission payment हो गया, तो 5,000 पे नहीं, 20,000 पे you have to deduct the tax. ठीक है? And please, you students are at inter level right now, but remember, does it write does not exceed 15,000 or it writes 15,000 or more? Just see what is the meaning coming out clearly and concisely. Okay? Non-applicability is almost same. There are certain circular, just one important circular you have to remember is of applicable on TDS provision on payments by television channels and publishing house to advertisement companies for procuring on canvassing advertisements. ये circular क्या कहता है? Let's just simply go through it. Okay. Let's take an example. I'll give you a brief of a case law also. Now suppose I am ABC Limited, ठीक है? I contracted let's say MPY Global Advertisers. Okay. This is an advertising agency. I contacted them. I told them I want a front page ad of my business on in the Times of India. Okay. So they charged for me 3 lakh rupees for this particular thing. I will deduct tax under section 194C for this particular type of payment. Correct? Yes. Advertising है, I will deduct tax under section 194C. Now, MPY Global Advertiser went to Times of India and they told that this is the ad, I've got you work, simple. So instead of I give them 3 lakhs for this particular thing, but they give Times of India 2,50,000. Now the question which was raised was this 50,000 which is being retained by MPY, is it a sort of commission which Times of India is giving to MPY? And if it is a sort of commission, then practically Times of India should deduct tax as for MPY because MPY got them the work. So it was given through clarifications and also case laws and judgment that this 50,000 is not in the nature of commission. It's like a spread of profit which MPY kept with them and gave the remaining to Times of India. This is not in the case of sort of a commission. Prima facie, it appears it is not a sort of commission, and section 194H is not attracted. But at the same time, not at your level, but there are certain case laws which support that if a particular person is working purely as an agent of a publishing house or of purely as an agent of a production company, मतलब सिर्फ उन्हीं के लिए काम करता है और किसी के लिए नहीं, purely उन्हीं का agent है, is not going to other offices or etc. Then in that case, it can be said that yes, there are commission-based services, but otherwise in general, it's not a commission part. It is not a commission part, exactly as correctly pointed by Aditya and Pooja here. Okay, and this is what a case of Moon and Moon TVS television channel which was there. अच्छा हाँ, मून टीवी का इसमें स्पेसिफिकेशन वाला पार्ट भी एक और चीज है. हाँ, एक और टेलीविजन चैनल वाला एक और पार्ट, रिमेंबर दिस इज इन रिलेशन टू 194C. Generally, this has also come through clarification. Channels make payments to Aditya, I'll just come to it. Channels make payment to production companies for getting the rights of the program so that they can air it. Getting the copyright of the program. Production companies like so Sony, Sony Limited, suppose they want to hypothetically showcase a television program of Balaji company, they will take the copyrights and they will make a payment to that. Okay. Another question was there that whether this broadcasting and payment which is made for broadcasting by the channel for the production company, whether it would be covered under 194C or not. Okay, broadcasting, telecasting आता है ना उधर. So the question, इसका clear clarification circulars के through आया that if the channel is making a payment to production company for a program which is made as per the specification of channels, मतलब चैनल ने बोला कि आप एक ऐसा प्रोग्राम बनाओ जिसमें ये स्टोरी लाइन हो, these are the characters, these are so and stuff, we want something like this. So there was a specification and customization of channel, then definitely 194C is there. But otherwise, suppose काफी टाइम ऐसा होता है कि प्रोडक्शन कंपनीज ऑलरेडी हैव देयर प्रोग्राम प्रोड्यूस एंड दे आर जस्ट लुकिंग टू सेल द कॉपीराइट. When they're just looking to sell the copyright, it is not section 194C because that is a sale of copyright. Otherwise, if there is a specification of channel and as per the specification of the channel, the production company has produced a program, then 194C would be attracted. But if there is no specifications, just selling of the rights, then it is copyrights being sold and it is not covered under 194C. And वही मैं ये कह रही थी यहाँ पे ये क्वेश्चन अगर सिर्फ 194C के स्कोप पे पूछता है, जस्ट गिव द आंसर एज पर 194C. डोंट गो आउट ऑफ द स्कोप कि विच चैनल में, विच सेक्शन में दिस पर्टिकुलर पेमेंट वुड बी अट्रैक्टेड और नॉट. ओके. Now coming to the next section. Before going to the next section, I think Aditya has a question. Can we get the TAN registration even though it is not applicable? See, Aditya, voluntary, any person can get TAN, any person can get PAN, even if they're not even if they're not mandatory required to apply it. That's not an issue, and it does not get expired also. मुझे यही नहीं करना क्वेश्चन में, ठीक है. Next section, again important section 194I, TDS on rent. So अभी तक quickly हमने कौन कौन से sections कर लिए? We did section 192, which is TDS on salary. Then we did section 193, which is TDS or interest on securities. Then we did section 194, which is interest other than interest on securities. Then we did 194A के बाद we picked up 194C, which is TDS on contract. Then we did 194H, which is TDS on commission. Now we come to 194I, which is TDS on rent. Now this section is also very important, very common. रेंटल पेमेंट तो होता रहता है, राइट. अब यहाँ पे भी सेम है. हु वुड बी द डिडक्टर? एनी पर्सन अदर देन इंडिविजुअल एचयूएफ would deduct tax under section 194I if they are making the payment in the nature of rent. And individual and HUF will deduct only when in the preceding year their turnover is more than 1 crore in case of business, or gross receipts in case of a profession is more than 50 lakhs. ठीक है, ये जितनी बार बार बोलोगे उतनी अच्छे से बार बार लिखोगे, ठीक है. देन ओनली दे वुड बी लायबल टू डिडक्ट टैक्स. सो एलिजिबल डिडक्टर के लिए टर्नओवर होना बहुत जरूरी है फॉर इंडिविजुअल एचयूएफ. नेक्स्ट क्वेश्चन इज हु वुड बी द मैम पे एनी रेजिडेंट पर्सन. So if you, ma'am, you are saying that if they're non-resident, no TDS would be required. I'm saying no TDS would be there under section 194I. There can be any other section, but not 194I for non-resident persons. 195 है वैसे तो, ठीक है. Next question which comes in your mind is obviously the threshold limit, which is again due or paid, whichever is earlier. Due or payment, whichever is earlier. Next question is, ma'am, what is the rate? The rate is 2% in respect of rent for plant, machinery, or equipment, and 10% in case of other rental payments. Up factory, building, land, general land also. Fixing. No, fact stopped. Yeah. Factory, building, land, even furniture. 10%. बहुत लोगों को ऐसा लगता है कि सिर्फ बिल्डिंग के लिए 10% एंड फर्नीचर के लिए 2%. नहीं, ओनली प्लांट एंड मशीनरी के लिए 2% है, अदरवाइज सबके लिए इट इज 10%. 10%. Ma'am, what is the threshold limit? Threshold limit is 2,40,000. So when the rent which you are paying is more than 2,40,000 per person in a financial year, you will deduct tax under section 194I. Now this brings me to a very common query. I'll quickly take an example. I am paying rent to Mr. A. Mr. A ko I am paying rent. Suppose I am paying rent of 4 lakh, out of which 2,50,000 is for building and 1,50,000 is for machinery. Now the question comes, will I deduct tax? Yes or no? And on how much amount? I am paying a rent of 4 lakh rupees, but 2,50,000 on building and 1,50,000 is for machinery. Same, ja Mr. A ko hi raha hai. But the question is, will I deduct tax or not, and how much? All conditions are fulfilled. I am an individual who has turnover more than 1 crore. All conditions fulfilled. Aditya says, okay, yes on 250. Okay, fair enough. Any other stand? All you people quickly. People says yes, but yes on what? Machinery with the 2% time. So the first thing is the TDS has to be deducted, which is clear. But whether on just 250, because that is only the rent which is crossing 240, that is wrong. The act says when you're making payment of rent to a person during a financial year of more than 250. It does not say paying rent for building of more than 250 and paying rent of plant and machinery of more than 240 categorically. They're just saying rent hai, more than 240 hai, same person को जा रहा है, you will deduct the tax. अब मेरे लिए just 4 lakh is the figure. So which is obviously more than 240, so I have to deduct the tax. Even if rent for machinery is less than 240 does not matter. What matters is कि rent category में Mr. A को कितना गया? 240 गया. So yes, building पे I will deduct tax at 10% and machinery पे I'll deduct the tax of 2% while making the payment. Got it? This is a very, very important thing. Correct, seat color, Sayamtani, very good. Aditya, I hope it is clear. Now, next question, एक और example लेते हैं, which I take in the live class also. The example is, I am paying rent of 4 lakh, but यहाँ पे 2 lakh is being paid to Mr. A and 2 lakh is being paid to Mrs. A for a building only. मतलब they are the co-owner, तो दोनों को आधा आधा जा रहा है. एक को 2 lakh जा रहा है and Mrs. A को भी 2 lakh जा रहा है. Now do I have to deduct the tax? Seat color, I think you're going in the correct answer. Pooja is also going in the correct answer. Yes, I don't have to deduct the tax because per person Mr. A के अकाउंट में मैंने कितना ही रेंट दिया इस पैन पे खाली 2 लाख दिया. Similarly, Mrs. A के अकाउंट में कितना ही रेंट दिया खाली 2 लाख दिया. So since it is not crossing the 2,40,000 limit per person in the financial year per pay, basically, I will not deduct the tax. I am not liable to deduct the tax. ठीक to the account of the pay does not exceed 2,40,000. ठीक है. And जब हम house property पढ़ते हैं, when we read house property, it is clearly told us that rental income would be considered as an income of house property only when the landlord is the owner, right? यहाँ पे ownership का there is no criteria. Even if a question comes to confuse you that Mr. A is not an owner, but is a person who has sublet you, then also you will deduct tax under 194I. Ownership, yeah, recipient के हाथ में where it would be taxable under which head does not matter to us. Does not matter to us. What matters is if the payment is in the nature of rent, you have to deduct the tax under section 194I. Simple. If it is more than 2,40,000, be it for plant and machinery, be it for building, be it for all both combined, but per person, if it is crossing 2,40,000, you will deduct the tax. As simple as that. और एक और चीज याद रखना, this is not only for your rent, but otherwise also the limits have to be seen excluding GST, and the tax also has to be deducted excluding GST component. The tax also has to be deducted excluding GST component because GST के लिए तो you will take the input credit. उसके अलावा there has been certain clarifications which I will be picking up one by one so that all your points are clear one by one. Okay. Um, okay. So a clarification here of cold storage or cooling charges. A theory question can come maybe. Cold storage क्या होता है? Basically, it's sort of a room, if I have to explain you, where the temperature is maintained so that the fruits and vegetables, generally perishable items, do not get destroyed easily. So we keep the food and items there. Generally, people who are in agriculture market, as in mandi, they do this. Okay, so they have cold storages and they keep the item there in that cold storage and make sure that it does not get destroyed. Now, there was a doubt for many years that when I'm using someone's space for cold storage, सब कोई cold storage खुद तो नहीं बना सकता. They use someone's person's space and give them the charges for using that cold storage. So will it be 194I or will it be 194C? Because the space is being used. Will it be 194I or will it be 194C? This is the question. So clarification came through circular that see 194I is obviously the payment which is being made to use a particular place, which is the area, and rental charges has to be considered. But when you're making payment for a cold storage charges, definitely you're occupying an area of that particular room. But also at the same time, it's not just occupying the area. That person who's providing you the facility of cold storage is providing you a proper facility in the form of maintaining the correct temperature, ensuring that the product does not get rotten, and all those things. So the clarification came that it's not just using of a land, but it's a proper service which is being provided of a contractual nature. So when such thing is there, it would not be 194I, but your 194C, which came through the clarification pretty clearly. Then another clarification which came on was remittance of passenger service fees by an airline to an airport operator. So generally what happens is that so the airport authorities is being paid पैसेंजर सर्विस फी. अब आप पूछोगे मैम ये पैसेंजर सर्विस फी क्या होता है. सो इन केस यू हैव बीन टू एयरपोर्ट्स पे एयरलाइंस को दे आर गिवन स्पेस टू demarcated space होता है, marked space होता है properly, that yes, you can collect the counters here, you can do all the services of getting the counters, check-ins, issuing the boarding passes at a particular place. And airport उसके बदले आपको security services भी दे रहे हैं, सब कुछ दे रहे हैं. So they are giving you an area also, and they are giving you assurances also through security services and etc. to the airline, right? If you go, आप देखोगे, if you enter an airport, वहां पे हर एक एयरलाइन का काउंटर इज देयर. ठीक है, उस काउंटर पे दे आर डूइंग देयर ओन सर्विसेज ऑफ पैसेंजर्स, allocating them flights, allocating them seats, giving them boarding pass, etc. So the question came that this passenger service fee, which the airline is giving to the airport operator for letting them use that area where they can do all their significant or insignificant work, will this be your 194I? So clear clarification came that this would not be covered under 194. A clear clarification from the department came that this would not be covered under 194I, because again there is a lot of element covered here just rather than using the area. जीएसटी का बाकी सब क्लियर. हाँ, दूसरा एक लमसम प्रीमियम के केस में जैसे लॉन्ग टर्म लीजेस होती है गवर्नमेंट से, उसमें क्या होता है अपफ्रंट आपको लमसम प्रीमियम देना होता है या लीज चार्जेस देना होते हैं. सो वहां पे भी देयर वाज अ क्लैरिफिकेशन व्हेन यू आर पेइंग लॉन्ग टर्म लीजेस में अपफ्रंट लीज प्रीमियम 194I would not be attracted on upfront lease premium. And this also makes me back to a question is that सिक्योरिटी डिपॉजिट. तो सिक्योरिटी डिपॉजिट भी आप रेंट पे लेते हो. अगर आप रेंट पेमेंट कर रहे हो, आप साथ साथ एक सिक्योरिटी डिपॉजिट देते हो एट द इनिशिएशन ऑफ रेंट period. That security deposit, if refundable, will not attract the provisions of 194I. Got it? So this is all about 194I. Does anyone has any doubt? If not, then we'll proceed to the next section, which is 194IB. अब ये भी रेंट पे है, but इसमें क्या डिफरेंस है? Let's discuss that. This is also an important section. All doubts unwind. 94 I clear, crystal clear. आई नो क्विक क्विक है, बस कहीं पे भी कोई डाउट हो जस्ट स्टॉप मी देन एंड देयर. नाउ इसकी भी हेडिंग यही है, पेमेंट ऑफ रेंट बाय सर्टेन इंडिविजुअल्स और एचयूएफ. अब 194 IB कौन से सर्टेन इंडिविजुअल्स को कवर करेगा? फॉर द रेंटल पेमेंट, पेमेंट ऑफ रेंट बाय सर्टेन इंडिविजुअल्स. अब इंडिविजुअल्स आर कवर और एचयूएफ आर ऑलरेडी कवर्ड अंडर 194I, बट कौन से, हु आर कवर्ड? Who in the preceding year have turnover of more than 1 crore in case of business or gross receipts of more than 50 lakhs in case of profession. Correct. Those are the one who are covered here, covered there under 194I. तो यहाँ पे ये certain individuals कौन से हो गए? Other than the one who had turnover of more than 1 crore or gross receipts of more than 50 lakhs. Right? So उनके अलावा if someone is paying rent, then 194IB can be attracted. 194I for individuals HF having turnover of more than 1 crore or 50 lakhs, as the case may be. 194IB, other than individual HF who are not who are having turnover of more than 1 crore in case of business or gross receipts of more than 50 lakhs in case of profession. So IB खाली उनके लिए आएगा, number 1. Number 2, this is on payment of rent. This is also on rent, but rent for use of land or building or both. It is not here for plant and machinery. It is not here for plant and machinery. Second point. So second variation क्या आ गया? Plant and machinery is not covered here. Now third variation and बाकी points क्या है? सबसे पहले all the time where I was telling you that individuals and HUF are excluded because of these common payment section. The reason is the compliance बहुत ज़्यादा है. There are a lot of things which you have to take care of. You have to deduct the tax, you have to deposit the tax, you have to file the returns, you have to issue the certificates. Right? That's why they were out of the scope. But अब ये sections को introduce करके like 194IA, IB, M, which you will see, what do government want to do is, see, government understand that okay, we cannot put so much compliances on people who are salaried, क्योंकि salaried employee अगर rent काटेगा तो वो कहाँ पहले जाके पहले deposit करेगा, फिर हर every month they have to deposit it, then every quarter they have to file the return. This is very tedious task. So they came up with a new way of deduction of tax without getting a TAN. Without getting a TAN, that means anyone, even if who does not have a TAN, can deduct tax and deposit it and file the return all in one go, all in one step. This mechanism were the exceptions to having a TAN. So first thing is, यहाँ पे if you have to deduct the tax under 194IB, you do not have to necessarily have a TAN number. Secondly, this is for payment of rent other than plant and machinery. Plant and machinery is not covered. Thirdly, if you are already an individual who have turnover of more than 1 crore or gross receipts of more than 50 lakhs, you will not deduct tax here. You will deduct tax under 194I. IB would only be attracted if you do not have those turnover. So जैसे salaried individual हो गए, या जैसे कोई लोग हो गया जिसका turnover last year से 40-50 lakhs था, तो वो सब लोग would be covered here. Now, why government felt a need of introducing this section? Because government saw that, suppose I'm talking about salaried individual who have crores of salary or good packages, they are paying rent, they might be living in rental accommodations, and they are paying rent of a good value. By good value means of more than 6-7 lakhs in a year, they might be paying a rent, technically if I talk about. So अब उनको कैसे cover करें? Because that is a very important source when they were paying so much high amount of rent. So they came up with this mechanism. So deductor part is clear, right? Deductee part, deductee would be any resident person. Threshold limit यहाँ पे सबसे important है. Threshold limit is that the tax is required to be deducted when the monthly rent, when the rent per month is more than 50,000. Then you have to deduct the tax. But अगर rent per month more than 50,000 है तो मैम वही problem हो जाएगी. Every month I have to deduct the tax, then I have to deposit it, then I have to file quarterly return. So they said no. The triggering point is when the rent per month is more than 50,000, but the time of deduction is just once. Is just one is either the last month of the year, that is March, if you are uh, the tenant till month of March, or last month of tenancy. Last month of the year or last month of tenancy. तो सपोज दिसंबर में खत्म खाली कर दिया घर, तो दिसंबर में टैक्स काटना है अगर 50,000 पर मंथ, जिस जिस मंथ में 50,000 से ज्यादा का रेंट है। अगर मार्च नहीं किया तो मार्च में टैक्स काटना। एक वन सिंगल गो में यू हैव टू डिडक्ट द टैक्स दैट इज ऑन द रेंट ऑफ द लास्ट मंथ और द लास्ट मंथ ऑफ द ऑक्यूपेंसी। सिंपल। So suppose I am paying someone a rent of 60,000 a month. So April में I'm paying them, since April I'm paying them a rent of 60,000 a month. Okay, so I will not deduct the tax anytime. I will deduct the tax in the month of March. So when the March rent month rent is due, which is 60,000, I will deduct the tax at 5% for 12 months in one go. So 60 ka 5% in one go, that is 36,000 altogether. I will deduct the tax and I will make a net payment of 24,000 for the month of March. और ये सारा का सारा 36,000 which I have deducted will be deposited in one go. No filing of return to be done quarterly. जैसे ही deposit कराऊंगी in चालान कम return form, जैसे in just one form, all the details would be filled in. The payment would be done and everything would be sorted. No need to deposit the tax monthly or quarterly, etc., etc., or file the return quarterly. Just one form and everything would be done. But एक problem आता है. There is one tweaking point here, which is when the when the PAN is not provided. अब suppose करो the person is not providing me the PAN. The TDS rate is 5%, but the provision says there is another provision, miscellaneous provision, which I'll cover up, that if the person who is not providing you a PAN, who is the pay for whom you have to deduct the tax, is not providing you a PAN. Why he may not provide you a PAN? Because he may not want that the government should get disclosed of all the information. So if he is not providing the PAN, then you have to deduct the tax at the rate of 20%. This is written in miscellaneous provisions. ठीक है? अब अगर मैं 20% के अकॉर्डिंग काटूं, I might not have enough enough amount. कैसे? Because suppose अब मैं मार्च में आई, I asked my landlord to give me the PAN number. He's not giving, but I have to deduct the tax. So what will I do? 60,000 into 12, the 20%. That comes to 1,44,000. अब 60,000 के rent से मैं 1,44,000 कैसे deduct करूँ? How would I deduct tax of 144 from the 60,000 rent? So the government says, in case the person is not providing you a rent and last month of the month of deduction has come, then what you will do? Then the maximum TDS you will deduct would be the amount of the rent for that month. So here the TDS would be 60,000 instead of 144. पूरा का पूरा tax आप काट लोगे, पूरा का पूरा rent आप काट लोगे as TDS if he is not providing you the maximum which you can do is 60,000, which is the rental amount in this case. बस एक यही question है which comes, that's it. And 194 IB is very, very simple. Then we come to section 194J. Post 194J, I would ask the tech team to give you speaking rights so that you can ask your query if any. Okay? And if time allows, then we'll proceed with the other sections. किसी को कोई doubt अभी तक? Yeah, Pooja. You can write down your query, Pooja. Else, I'll just after 194J, we'll give the speaking right. Don't worry. Fees for professional or technical services. Now, this particular section says although fees for professional or technical services under section 194J, but it actually covers five types of services, which is A, fees for professional or technical services, यानी आपने किसी से professional services ली, उसका fees. B, fee for technical services. C, any remuneration or commission by whatever name called paid to director other than director's salary. Because अगर director salary है तो वो 192 में जाएगा. But उसके अलावा other than director salary, which is not taxed as salary, any remuneration of fees, board meeting fees, etc. fees, whatever you're paying to director would be covered under 194J. Royalty would be covered under 194J and non-compete fees. Non-compete fees क्या होते हैं? If I do not want any person to compete with me in a same area, in a same field, or in the same location, or in for my same clients, I can pay him that fee for not losing my business. And that fee which I'm being paying to them, that is called non-compete fee. ठीक है, ये 5 types of payment each are covered under 194J. Who would be the deductor? Who would be the deductee? Is exactly same like 194A or C or H or I. That is, individual and HUF would only deduct tax when they have in the preceding year turnover of more than 1 crore in case of business or gross receipts of more than 50 lakhs in case of profession. Otherwise, all people have to deduct tax under 194J, A, C, H, I. ठीक है? Who would be the pay resident person? ठीक है? Deductor, deductee, type of payment clear? Now, what we come to is next is rate and threshold limit. Now, rate से पहले threshold limit बताती हूँ. Threshold limit सबका individually 30,000 है. That means 30,000 for professional services, 30,000 for technical services, 30,000 for royalty, 30,000 for non-compete fees. यानी अगर 30,000 से ज्यादा का पेमेंट हुआ तो ठीक है, exceeding 30. But director remuneration का, which is under 194J, is there is no limit. Even if you're paying 10 rupees, you have to deduct the tax under 194J for director remuneration. No limit. सबका 30,000 है. अब suppose, ma'am, what do you mean? So suppose I'm making payment to Mr. A, professional service 25,000 and royalty 20,000. I will not deduct the tax under 194G. Why? Because each ka limit is not crossing 30,000. Each ka limit is not crossing 30,000. When each limit crosses 30,000, then I have to deduct. Now, suppose instead of 25, this is 35 and royalty is still, say, 20K. Will I deduct the tax? The answer is again no, because on royalty, I will not deduct the tax, but on professional, I will deduct the tax. So the limit for each is 30,000. इस पे तो I will deduct tax at the rate of 1%, which is 10%, 3,500, but इस पे I will not, or I am not eligible to do so. ठीक है? So, ma'am, how, अगर आप सिर्फ Mr. A का account बनाओगे तो you will get confused. Always when you're making tally accounts, make it like Mr. A's professional account, Mr. A's royalty account, so that you can see whether the limit has hit or not. Now we come to the rate. So the rate in general is 10%. The rate in general is 10% when I talk about the fees which are covered under 194J. But the rate for technical services, they have reduced to 2%. Technical services ka rate is 2%. So if I'm making payment for professional services, I will deduct tax at 10%. But if I'm making payment for technical services, I will deduct tax at 2%. And also cinematographic film ka royalty. Royalty. अब ये पूछो कि ये क्या होता है? So every distributor has to give a royalty to the production company for the films which they have taken up. ठीक है? So उस royalty pay, basically the tax is deducted at the rate of 2%. Otherwise, royalty pay tax is 10%. So if I'm paying you royalty for books, you wrote book, I'm giving you royalty for that, I will deduct tax at the rate of 10%. But if I'm paying you royalty for the films which I have purchased from you, I will pay the tax at the, I will deduct the tax at the rate of 2%. And एक मेरा call centers, which is 2%. Otherwise, the rates are 10% for director's remuneration, professional services, general royalty, non-compete fees, it is 10%. Okay. Rate and limit में किसी को कोई doubt? Wait. Now we proceed ahead with मैम प्रोफेशनल सर्विसेज और में एक्चुअली कवर क्या क्या होता है? व्हाट डू यू मीन बाय प्रोफेशनल सर्विसेज में? व्हाट इज द डिफरेंस? Okay, Kiran, 10% is for in general, but 2% is for technical services payment and royalty on cinematographic films, and 2% is for payment to call centers. Otherwise, 10% होगा. तो प्रोफेशनल सर्विसेज में क्या क्या आता है? प्रोफेशनल सर्विसेज में द लिस्ट व्हिच यू कैन सी ऑन द स्क्रीन, ओनली दोज वुड बी कवर्ड. इफ दे आर आउट ऑफ दिस वुड नॉट कवर अंडर प्रोफेशनल सर्विसेज. सो प्रोफेशनल सर्विसेज की डेफिनेशन में प्रोफेशनल सर्विसेज व्हिच आर मेंशन्ड अंडर 44A, which are notified under 44AA for the purpose of 44AD also, वो सब आएगा. और एक 194J में कुछ नोटिफाई हुआ है, ये सब प्रोफेशनल सर्विसेज में आएगा. कौन कौन सा? लीगल, मेडिकल, इंजीनियरिंग, आर्किटेक्चरल प्रोफेशन, और अकाउंटेंसी, टेक्निकल कंसल्टेंसी, इंटीरियर डेकोरेशन, एडवर्टाइजिंग और सच अदर प्रोफेशन हैज बीन नोटिफाइड. अब एडवर्टाइजिंग, ये वो एडवर्टाइजिंग नहीं है जो 194C में. दैट इज व्हेन यू आर गिविंग एड. यहाँ पे है व्हेन the services are done in the course of advertising. If some actor is working, some script writer is working for advertising, उस case में if I am making the payment, that would be 194C. That would be 194J. If I am making payment just for advertising, that is 194C. But if it's advertising, means someone is carrying on the work of a script writer, a songwriter, or any actor or anyone, that is 194J. उसके अलावा what are the profession notified? No, profession of authorized representatives, फिल्म आर्टिस्ट, कंपनी सेक्रेटरी एंड इंफॉर्मेशन टेक्नोलॉजी. ये सब आपका प्रोफेशन नोटिफाइड है. इसके अलावा क्या 194J में नोटिफाई किया है? स्पोर्ट्स रिलेटेड सर्विसेज. स्पोर्ट्स रिलेटेड सर्विसेज में सब स्पोर्ट्स पर्सन, एम्पायर्स, रेफरीज, कोचेस, ट्रेनर्स, फिजिशियंस, इवेंट मैनेजर्स, कमेंटेटर्स, एंकर्स, कॉलमिनिस्ट, सब सब कवर्ड हो गए. हाँ, चीयर लीडर्स इसमें नहीं कवर्ड हुआ डेफिनेटली. उसके अलावा एवरीवन इज कवर्ड अंडर 194J. सो सपोज for IPL, Virat Kohli gets any payment, that would be deducted under 194J, provided he is a resident. But Chris Gayle getting any payment, that will not cover under 194J. Or, for example, let's take an example of commentators. Same. Any resident commentator being paid for the commentating, 194J. Otherwise, 194, 195, yeah, whatever section is covered for them. Okay. इसके अलावा remember any other professional service, any professional services which you can think of, if it is not in this list, it is not professional service. Anchor भी anchors होते हैं, जैसे आपके अगर आपने कभी पोस्ट मैच प्रेजेंटेशन देखी हो, उसमें हर्षा भोगले comes and anchors and give the presentation ceremony, right? That is called anchors, जो generally host कर रहे हैं उसको. ठीक है, सिर्फ ये सब प्रोफेशनल सर्विसेज में आएगा, इसके अलावा नहीं. आर्किटेक्चरल प्रोफेशनल सर्विसेज में आएगा. अब इंटरेस्टिंगली ये देखो क्या इसमें प्ले क्या है. आई एम हायरिंग एन आर्किटेक्ट. Architect is hiring a plumber. Suppose here, carpenter. I'm hiring an architect. I will make payment to him, and I will deduct the tax under section 194J because architecture services है. अब architecture service, अब आगे वो painters को रखते हैं काम करने के लिए, या कोई भी person को रखते हैं for doing any work. They will deduct tax under 194C between, that is between architect and that painter. ठीक है. or interior decorator. Suppose I'm hiring an interior decorator and I told them the brief, I want the room to be very bright, a lot of lights, so and so colors, etc. Okay, that is when I'm making a payment to interior decorator. I will deduct the tax under 194J. Now, interior decorator painters को पकड़ के लाए या carpenters को पकड़ के लाए, and they are making the work as per the specifications of interior decorator. Interior decorator will make the payment to them and they will deduct the TDS under 194C. Why? Because again, you have to see payment and service क्या है पर पार्टी, दोनों पार्टीज के इन्वॉल्व के बीच में पेमेंट एंड सर्विसेज क्या है. अब जैसे इवेंट मैनेजर्स आर कवर्ड अंडर 194J. But अब event managers आगे caterers रखते हैं, they are making payment to them, that would be 194C. दोनों parties के बीच में what is the transactions and what is the type of payment, that you have to see to ultimately see whether it is 194J or 194C. Always there is a legal fight, legal battle going on basis transaction by transaction, details by details, कि whether it's 194J or whether it's 194C. सिंपल है. J में कब आएगा? जब वो ये प्रोफेशनल सर्विसेज में कवर्ड है. C में कब आएगा? When it's a basic skill, manual work of service or a contract. जहां पे भी एक्सपर्टीज, स्किल्स, टेक्निकल नॉलेज, एनीथिंग आ गया, दैट इज 194J. ठीक है. So now what is technical services? See, technical services again has a very broad meaning, but any payment which is given for mechanical services, technical services or consultancy, advisory basically, that would be technical services. For example, I want to get some feedback done of the market, some survey done for the market. So someone approaches me and I give them the contract for it. It's a technical services because they are giving me some managerial knowledge of the work which is to be done. A consultancy they are providing me. अब यहाँ पे ना एक fight हमेशा रहेगा, which if you will think कि technical services की definition में भी consultancy services आ रहा है एंड प्रोफेशनल सर्विसेज की भी डेफिनेशन में मतलब टेक्निकल कंसल्टेंसी आ रहा है. तो मैम बट प्रोफेशनल सर्विसेज में 10% कटेगा और टेक्निकल सर्विसेज में 2% कटेगा. सो हाउ वुड बी मेक दैट डिफरेंशिएशन? सी स्टूडेंट, दैट इज अ वेरी क्रिटिकल डिफरेंशिएशन एंड रिक्वायर्स अ लॉट ऑफ डिग्री ऑफ व्हाट इज द वर्क इज डन एंड ऑल. So इस केस में the safer side is to go with this 10%. The safer side to go is with 10% because प्रोफेशनल सर्विसेज की डेफिनेशन में लिखा हुआ है टेक्निकल कंसल्टेंसी और टेक्निकल सर्विसेज की डेफिनेशन में कंसल्टेंसी लिखा हुआ है. So वहां पे देयर कैन बी अ बिग क्लैश एंड देयर आर बिग क्लैशेस रादर. सो इट्स बेटर अगर एक कंसल्टेंसी है जहां पे थोड़ा टेक्निकल नॉलेज का रिक्वायरमेंट है, टेक इट एज प्रोफेशनल सर्विसेज एंड डिडक्ट टैक्स एट 10%. ओके. और इसके अलावा व्हाट ऑल इज लेफ्ट अंडर दिस पर्टिकुलर सेक्शन? Royalty. See, royalty is generally what you pay for using a particular invention, innovation, work of art, literature, etc., etc. So there has been a clear clarification that computer software is purchasing of computer software and paying consideration for that is royalty. Definitely, provided that computer software is not installed in a device already. अगर मेरे लैपटॉप मैंने परचेज किया, इसमें कंप्यूटर सॉफ्टवेयर ऑलरेडी आ रहा है, दैट इज नॉट रॉयल्टी. बट अदरवाइज आई एम परचेजिंग अ कंप्यूटर सॉफ्टवेयर, द पेमेंट ऑफ विच इज इक्वल टू रॉयल्टी एंड आई हैव टू डिडक्ट टैक्स अंडर सेक्शन 194G फॉर दैट. बट उसके अलावा देर इज अ क्लैरिफिकेशन already there that if suppose A gave a computer software to B and B passed on that computer software to me. Okay, suppose which I'll write C. Okay. Now A when gave the computer software to B, B must have deducted royalty, paid TDS under section 194J. Okay. And if B without any modification give that same computer software to me, I will not deduct the tax on royalty on this. I will not deduct the tax on royalty on this. If B tells me that I have already deducted the requisite tax and I am giving you the software without modification, I'm giving you the software without modification, then I as in C, would not deduct the tax when he's making the royalty payment to B. Again, I'll repeat, the software is acquired in a subsequent transfer without any modification of the transferor. And C has acquired this without any modification by B. tax has been deducted under section 194J for any previous transfer. B has deducted the tax under section 194J, and the transferee obtains a declaration from the transferor that the tax has been so deducted. और मैं as C B से पूछूंगी that whether you have deducted the tax, and I will take a declaration on it. Then I do not have to deduct the tax. This particular case scenario can come as a case study to you. So please focus on that. Apart from this, hospitals wala is okay. Sir, can you please give the speaking rights to the students? I believe few of them had a question. So anyone has any queries up till section 194J, please feel to discuss. I think Pooja wanted to ask if she's here.
Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning, Pooja. How are you?
I'm fine, ma'am.
Yes,
Ma'am,
tell me.
I want to know about 192 मतलब सैलरी के बारे में था कि जैसे आपने कहा कि हाउस प्रॉपर्टी का जो मतलब हाउस प्रॉपर्टी की इनकम है वो हम उसे बता क्या कहते हैं एम्प्लॉयर को बता सकते हैं और उसका वो डिडक्शन देगा। लेकिन मैम जैसे हाउस प्रॉपर्टी की इनकम होगी या कोई भी रेंट से इनकम होगी उसका तो जो मतलब टेनेंट है वही उसका टीडीएस कट करेगा, तो फिर एम्प्लॉयर को उसको मतलब बताने की क्या जरूरत है। और इसी तरीके से और भी किसी भी हेड का होगा तो जो मतलब जो सोर्स है वही उसका उसका टैक्स डिडक्ट करेगा, तो उस केस में एम्प्लॉयर मतलब ये तो इनवैलिड सा केस हो गया ना मैम।
नहीं नहीं, इनवैलिड नहीं. फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल दिस इज अ वेरी वेरी गुड क्वेश्चन, वेरी राइटली आस्क्ड. दो तीन सिनेरियोज हैं. एक सिनेरियो हो सकता है कि सपोज सम इंडिविजुअल इज पेइंग मी द रेंट एंड ही मे नॉट डिडक्ट द टैक्स. ठीक है, वन सिनेरियो कैन बी दिस. And see again, house property income or any other income is not mandatory to be told. Why people tell? Reason is कि कल को कोई, because if I have only salary income and few of other incomes, I may have to pay advance tax on my other incomes. So because of that clearance that I don't want to pay advance tax, consider everything, deduct tax automatically. I tell it to the employer. अब coming to your shortcomings कि अगर सपोज करो रेंट है एंड ऑलरेडी कोई और टीडीएस काट रहा होगा उस पे, देन व्हाई आई हैव टू टेल इट टू द एम्प्लॉयर. First, maybe scenario one, maybe the tenant may not be an eligible deductor, and he might not be deducting the tax at source. One scenario can be this. अब suppose मेरा rent ही सिर्फ 2 lakhs rupees है during the year, he might not be deducting the tax, correct? But 2 lakh पे अगर मैं उसे income में consider करूँ अपनी, तो definitely tax आएगा, right? Second scenario, which is also similar, that suppose even if the rent is 3 lakh and the other person might be deducting the tax. The other person might be deducting the tax, but he would be deducting the tax at the rate of 10% only. Now, suppose I'm falling in a bracket of 30%. Then what? So it's वो differentiation तो आएगा ना at the time of filing the final return. So that's why I think it's better to tell it to the employer that I have 3 lakh का rent, but इसमें 10% TDS deduct हो रहा है. If I tell them that also, so they will consider that TDS of 10%, and after that they will deduct the tax. So that is why, and this can be for any income, be it for interest also. Suppose मुझे FD interest भी मिल रहा है बैंक से 1 लाख का, but बैंक TDS उस पे सिर्फ 10% काट रहा होगा, but I might be falling in a slab of 30%. So that differentiation can be covered through the employer or by me, whichever way I find it better. Okay, Pooja?
मैम जैसे कि ये एडवांस टैक्स के मतलब पर्पज से हम इस एम्प्लॉयर को बताते हैं इस चीज के बारे में।
एडवांस टैक्स ना पे करना पड़े इसलिए हम एम्प्लॉयर्स को बताते हैं कि एडवांस टैक्स का सरदर्दी ना आए.
ओके
ओके,
एंड
क्योंकि
मैम
डिफरेंस हो सकता है इवन इफ टीडीएस कट रहा हो, सारी इनकम पे भी टीडीएस कट रहा हो, बट फिर भी डिफरेंस आ सकता है. सपोज सैलरी भी हटा दो, आप एक पल को सैलरी भी हटा दो, आई हैव ओनली प्रोफेशनल रिसीट्स और मेरी सारी प्रोफेशनल रिसीट्स पे द पेयर इज डिडक्टिंग द टैक्स, बट obviously they're deducting just 10%, right? I may be filing in combination of more than 10 lakhs as an income. तो वो differentiation तो मुझे pocket से pay करना पड़ेगा ना as advance tax और self assessment tax. इसलिए people, when it comes to employer, they want to tell it so that they do not want to be in the sardardi of advance tax. बस.
ओके मैम मतलब फिर भी इनकम टैक्स तो मतलब रिटर्न तो फाइल करना ही पड़ता है ना लास्ट में।
रिटर्न तो सबको एंड में खुद फाइल करना है. ऑल दी सेसीज, ऑल द deductees, everyone has to file the return definitely when they are falling into the provisions of return filing. That is when they have income more than basic exemption limit. Everyone has to do it, but बस जैसे स्टार्टिंग ऑफ द क्लास में बताया था कि गवर्नमेंट ने ये मैकेनिज्म्स क्यों लाए, क्योंकि ताकि एक तो थोड़ा टैक्स आता रहे थोड़े थोड़े सोर्सेज से थोड़ा थोड़ा, एंड सेकेंडली इंफॉर्मेशन पता चल जाए, वेरीफाई हो सके. अब कल को मैं रेंट दिखाऊं, मेरे को सिर्फ 3 लाख मिल रहा है, बट टेनेंट एक्चुअली दिखाए कि 5 लाख का रेंट पे हुआ है, सो वेरीफाई हो सके ना इन्फॉर्मेशन. दैट्स व्हाई टीडीएस एंड टीसीएस मैकेनिज्म्स आर इंट्रोड्यूस्ड.
एक और क्वेश्चन था मैम,
हाँ हाँ
194 सेक्शन 194 जो डिविडेंड वाला है, उसकी
जी.
थ्रेशोल्ड एक बार बता दो मैम. ये मतलब इसमें थोड़ा अजीब सा लिखा हुआ है, समझ नहीं आ रहा.
बट इसमें है डिविडेंड, क्योंकि अगर इसमें होता मैं कवर करती आई थिंक.
मैम
डिविडेंड
194 ये लिस्ट में दिया हुआ है अदर टीडीएस
लिस्ट
प्रोविजन
में
में.
दिया हुआ है, बट डिटेल्स में नहीं दिया हुआ है ना.
जी.
ओके, ये मैं वही देख रही थी, आई वाज गोइंग बाय द टॉपिक बाय टॉपिक. मैंने देखा है कि डिविडेंड था ही नहीं, कि डिविडेंड का वैसे एज सच कोई थ्रेशोल्ड लिमिट नहीं है. बट इफ डोमेस्टिक कंपनी किसी इंडिविजुअल को डिविडेंड पे करती है, तो वो तब तक टीडीएस नहीं काटेगी जब तक वो डिविडेंड इज अप टू 5,000 रुपीज इन एंड दे आर पेइंग द डिविडेंड इन एनी मोड अदर देन कैश. तो जैसे ही वो 5,000 अबव होगा, दे विल डिडक्ट द टैक्स एट द रेट ऑफ 10%.
मतलब 5000 अदर देन कैश है. एक
सो दो तरीके हो सकते हैं. अगर डोमेस्टिक कंपनी, एंड दिस इज ओनली फॉर इंडिविजुअल नॉट फॉर अदर पीपल, ठीक है. सपोज द कंपनी इज पेइंग डिविडेंड ऑफ 10,000 रुपीज, नेचुरली दे हैव टू डिडक्ट द टैक्स. इफ आई टॉक अबाउट फ्रॉम इंडिविजुअल परस्पेक्टिव, ठीक है, बिकॉज जैसे ही 5,000 से क्रॉस हुआ, यू हैव टू डिडक्ट द टैक्स. 5,000 तक यू डोंट हैव टू डिडक्ट द टैक्स, प्रोवाइडेड दैट डिविडेंड इज पेड इन एनी मोड अदर देन कैश.
अदर देन.
अगर 5,000 का भी डिविडेंड कैश में पे हो रहा है, तब तो टीडीएस कटेगा.
समझ गई, थैंक यू.
ठीक है. एनी अदर डाउट? पूजा और कोई डाउट है?
नो मैम, थैंक यू मैम.
Thank you so much. Very good question. Seat color royalty 194J B. Who pays should not be an individual HF, can be, ma'am. Seat color, can you please repeat your question here? Um, Seat color, can you please repeat your question again? It's not clear on the what you've written. Okay. The person who pay royalty should be individual HF. See, generally, if one more point left, thank you to tell me. See, 194J में individual and HF has to deduct the tax when they are paying professional services or technical services. Because director fees तो वो pay करेंगे नहीं, because director fees तो company only pays, so that is also out of scope. And royalty non-compete fees are also out of scope for individual and HF. So they have to deduct tax only when they're paying professional and technical fees, number one. And one more important point which skipped was that individual and HF has to deduct tax only when they're making payments which are not for personal purpose, just like 194C. जैसे 194J में भी same है. So suppose I'm making payment for lawyer, legal services, I will deduct tax if it is for my business. But if I'm paying lawyer for services, for some personal family dispute, I will not deduct tax, even if in the preceding year I have a turnover of more than 1 crore or gross receipts of more than 50 lakhs. So since C and J are two sections, 194C and 194J are two sections which do not cover personal purpose payments. So any personal purpose payments होंगी, they would be out of the scope of C and J. 194C and 194J. ठीक है? Thank you, Seat Color, for reminding this point was left. Any other doubt? Let me see the other list also. Unique question: how to differentiate between technical and professional services? See, generally all types of consultancies, etc., whatever is as per the list of those professional nature would go, जो professional services का list है would go as per professional services. उसके अलावा कुछ टेक्निकल सर्विस है जहाँ पे थोड़ा सा स्किल रिक्वायर्ड है, कुछ रिपोर्ट रिक्वायर्ड है, एनालिसिस रिक्वायर्ड है, वुड गो अंडर टेक्निकल सर्विसेज. अगर मैं बात करूँ एक बेसिक यूनिक्रिशन प्लम्बर सर्विसेज की भी, प्लम्बर सर्विसेज की भी, प्लम्बर सर्विस अगर नॉर्मल मेंटेनेंस वर्क के लिए आया दैट इज योर 194C मेंटेनेंस वर्क है. बट अगर प्लम्बर भी कुछ ऐसे टेक्निकली कुछ यूनिक सा प्रॉब्लम सॉल्व करने के लिए आए हैं, इट कैन बी 194J. सो देर इज ऑलवेज दिस फाइट कि क्या टेक्निकल है, क्या कॉन्ट्रैक्चुअल है, क्या प्रोफेशनल है. बट प्रोफेशनल के लिए सिंपल है, बट एज पर द लिस्ट विच इज बीइंग प्रोवाइडेड, लीगल, मेडिकल, जो इंजीनियरिंग, आर्किटेक्चरल, इंटीरियर डेकोरेटर, अकाउंटेंसी, कंपनी सेक्रेटरी, वो सब अगर उन सब लिस्ट बोर्ड्स एक्सेट्रा, if they are into that list, 194J प्रोफेशनल. If they're out of that list, then you have to see कि टेक्निकल डिग्री का कुछ काम है, कुछ एक्सपर्टीज का काम है, कुछ कस्टमाइज्ड नॉलेज अप्लाई करने का काम है. इफ यस, then 194J technical services. If no regular maintenance knowledge work है, then 194C. Thank you so much, Aditya. Thank you, everyone. Does anyone has any other doubt? Yes, we can wrap up the class, and other remaining 2-3 sections will be pick up in the next class with provisions of TCS. All clear? Great. Thank you. Have a good day. See you on Friday. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Have a good